Ladies and gentlemen, it is 10:15, so we will get started. All right. I've been asked to consider common objections to capitalism. Okay? And I run into these a lot as an economist, as a sort of concerned citizen, and as someone who has a lot of conversations with people who are not economists, as an economic historian, and as someone who deals a lot with the history of economic thought. So if I had real PowerPoint, I'm sure I could set that up, but I don't really want to go to the trouble. I would be showing you my Facebook, my Facebook page. My status update this morning was Art Carden is alienated and demoralized by Facebook, Apple, Chick-fil-A, good coffee, and wireless internet. And Google. Because this is one of the common objections to capitalism, that it's alienating and demoralizing. So, and that's one of the things we're going to consider. What I'm going to do is I'm going to run through kind of a tick list of objections to capitalism. Some of the ones that I run into, some of the things I deal with in my research, teaching, and popular writing, and then I'll open up the floor to you guys and see what you think are good, reasonable, common objections to capitalism. Number one, capitalism exploits the poor. Fill in the blank. The rich get richer, the poor get poorer. Right, yes. Capitalism is a system by which the rich exploit the poor, the rich get richer, the poor get poorer, and they're lucky if they're thrown a couple of crumbs from the tables of their capitalist masters. Okay? That's not true. Right? In fact, it's simply false. It was a prediction of parts of classical economics, particularly Ricardian economics. If you look at the way that factor payments are distributed in an economy, factor payments can go to owners of capital, factor payments can go to owners of land, and factor payments can go to wage laborers. Okay? One of the predictions that was made, and something that unfortunately has persisted in the popular press and in sort of non-economics academia, is the idea that all of the income payments will accrue to the owners of capital, to the owners of land, at the expense of unskilled laborers. Okay, this is kind of the Marx and Engels prediction. The product of unskilled laborers' work will be expropriated from them by their evil capitalist masters, who will continue to accumulate. This is Moses and the prophets, according to Marx. Okay? The rich will get richer, the poor will get poorer, and we will live in this privatized capitalist dystopia. Marx and Engels were exactly, precisely, 100%, totally the opposite of reality wrong. Greg Clark, an economic historian at the University of California at Davis, has a fantastic book that came out a couple of years ago. It's called A Farewell to Alms, A Brief Economic History of the World. I don't buy his theoretical argument totally, but his economic historical work is absolutely fantastic. And he shows in chapter 14 of that book, in which he evaluates the Marx and Engels thesis about unskilled labor, he says, well, tell you what, let's look at what the data show. If Marx and Engels are right, and if all factor payments are going to accrue to owners of capital and to owners of land at the expense of workers, then we should see massive increases in land rents. We should see massive increases in returns on capital, so big increases in interest rates, and we should see relatively stagnant real wages. Using data, using very cleverly acquired data, I might add, on Britain for over about the last 800 years, he shows that land rents today are roughly equal to average land rents 800 years ago. There are all sorts of fluctuations over this period, but in the long run, the returns to being a landowner haven't really changed that much. Interest rates exhibit much the same pattern. Interest rates, again, with lots of fluctuations over the long run, are not much higher than they were 800 years ago. So returns to land, returns on capital, haven't really changed a whole lot. Who were the big winners from industrialization? The big winners from industrialization were unskilled laborers. Returns on capital, flat. Returns on land, flat. Wages for unskilled laborers grew explosively, okay, over roughly the last 800 years. So capitalism made us all better off, but it particularly redounded to the benefit of unskilled laborers. So capitalism exploits the poor? Well, not necessarily true. Joseph Schumpeter states this very, very well when he talks about capitalist progress consisting not of more and better silk stockings for the Queen of England, but reasonable substitutes for silk stockings for girls who work in factories in industrial Britain for ever decreasing quantities of labor. So the amount of labor that you have to expend in order to get, for him, talking about stockings for girls, for us, a decent cup of coffee, or a computer, or a pad of paper, or something like that, continues to decrease and decrease and decrease and decrease. Another popular thing that people like to talk about a lot is inequality. Okay, say, well, capitalism distributes resources unequally. So yeah, it's true that maybe unskilled workers are better off, but they're getting a little bit richer, while the really skilled, uber rich people are getting fantastically, super shockingly wealthy. And if you look at trends in income distribution, money income going to the very, very rich may be higher than money income going to the relatively poor. Okay, but this ignores a handful of important points. Okay, and my advisor, John Nye, who will come up periodically, he was at WashU while I was there at grad school, he's now at George Mason, has a couple of really great articles on the Liberty Fund's website in which he makes arguments about irreducible inequality and whether we're measuring inequality correctly. So let's consider what we mean by inequality. As a society gets richer and richer and richer, the distribution of income becomes less reliable as a measure of meaningful inequality because the technological characteristics of the goods and services that are available to the very, very poor will come to much more closely resemble the technological characteristics of the goods that are available to the very, very, very rich. I'm not really much of a wine snob. I've known some people who are. And apparently wine can get very, very, very expensive. Very expensive. I would Google it if I had the time, inclination, and technology. But let's assume that you can buy a bottle of wine for like $2,000. Is it really such a bad thing that Bill Gates can buy a $2,000 bottle of wine to have with his dinner, while, say, the average middle-class family or even the average poor family would have to go to, if you live somewhere where there's a Trader Joe's, you can get a bottle of $2 Chuck or $3 Chuck, Charles Shaw Vineyards award-winning wine for $2 or $3 a bottle. That's actually quite good. So this might be 1,000 times more expensive. So Chateau Expenditure versus $2 Chuck. Okay, the characteristics of the goods and services that are available to me as a poor, untenured faculty member in Memphis, Tennessee, are a reasonable substitute for the goods that are available to Guido Hulsmann, a rich, tenured faculty member at a university in France, okay, where I'm sure he's drinking $2,000 bottles of wine with every meal. Okay. If we wish to consider the differences between the rich and the poor, again, technological characteristics are a large part of what we wish to consider. I would argue, and I don't really know there's an a priori praxeological way to do this, I would argue that the difference between the wine that's available to Guido and the wine that's available to me is much smaller than the difference between the wine that was available to Louis XIV and the total absence of resources available to a starving peasant in the French countryside several hundred years ago. So the difference between rich and poor historically was the difference between who lived and who died. The difference between rich and poor today is the difference between, rich and poor in a country like the United States is the difference between who gets to drink really, really, really expensive wine and who just drinks the proverbial cheap stuff. The quality of those goods has improved dramatically. And this is one of Nye's examples. How many of you guys have ever been to like Golden Corral or Ryan's Steakhouse or something like that? Okay, this huge, enormous smorgasbords of food. Or if you've ever been to a buffet at a Las Vegas casino, okay, this is just unbelievable. We were visiting friends in St. Louis a few weeks ago, and there's this new Vegas-style casino in St. Louis, and we went to the King Crab Leg buffet on Friday night, and this, undergirds my belief that there is a benevolent and loving God. Okay, because it wasn't cheap, but the fact that this was available to me, the poor, humble, untenured professor at a liberal arts college in Memphis, Tennessee, suggested that someone's looking out for me. So if you go to Golden Corral or something like that, you see these amazing smorgasbords of probably relatively low quality food, but this is what sort of the great kings of yesteryear would have killed for. Okay? If you look at sort of the banquet of a very, very rich person in the 19th century, or royalty in the 15th century, 16th century, 17th century, you've got meat of questionable quality, bread, seasonal fruits and vegetables, ice cream if you're really lucky, wine, a handful of other things. Today, it's considered by some people, it's considered a strike against capitalism that you can go to Bust Your Gut buffet and bust your gut, and then go and pull a little handle and make yourself a dish of soft serve ice cream, which you can then sort of load up with busted up M&Ms or something like that, or whatever happens to float your boat. Okay? The world has changed, and the world has changed a lot. So, objection 1, capitalism distributes resources unequally, capitalism exploits the poor. Not really true. Alright. Objection number 2, and this I find interesting. Capitalism is structurally racist and sexist. Okay? Capitalism is structurally racist and sexist. This is an interesting idea. Walter Block has talked about interventionism. I've written on Mises.org and a handful of other places. This is probably not really the case. Okay? Racism and sexism are a couple of the great moral failings of human history, in my opinion. I consider myself, I guess, maybe sort of like an Austro-progressive, or something to that effect. And that I have a lot of I have a lot of progressive sympathies, but I tend to propose Austro-libertarian solutions. Okay? In fact, capitalism punishes racism and sexism. Okay? Because, let's consider the decisions that are made by someone who wishes to indulge their racist preferences. Okay? You say, all right, I am not going to hire someone because I don't like their skin color or because I don't like their gender. I wish to pay them a rate that is lower than the discounted present value of their marginal revenue product, or I wish to not hire them at all. Okay. So you got Billy Bob sitting around at the Klan meeting talking about how he's discriminating against people he doesn't like. Okay. What do you do? How do you respond? Or what should competition do? Sorry. Oh, okay. Sorry.
Somebody else will hire him.
Yes. Absolutely, yes. Competition means that if you are literally leaving money on the table in order to indulge your preferences for discriminating against these people or those people or whatever, okay, then this gives someone else an incentive to hire, those people and pay them a rate that is more consistent with their productivity. So this is one of the truly beautiful things about capitalism. It doesn't fix all problems, but it means that even people with positive antipathy toward each other, can find a way to cooperate because competitive pressure will compel them to do so over time. Now, I'll get to your question in just a second. Okay, now, will that? It may take a while for that for the market to adjust. And among the things I study Southern economic history and the relationship between racist violence and economic development. Okay? And there's a lot of truly appalling, tragic stuff that happened in the South. A friend of mine and I, some of you might be familiar with Christopher Coyne. He's an economist at West Virginia University. He and I are working on a project about the Memphis race riot of 1866 as an example of quasi-unsuccessful institutional change, and you run into a really serious problem that highlights the differences between the market and the state, because the state has, as I mentioned the other day, a comparative advantage in violence or a monopoly on the legitimate use of force. But what do you do when all of the cops are members of the KKK? Or what do you do when the guys with the monopoly on the legitimate use of force are not constrained by competitive pressure not to indulge their creepy racist preferences? Okay. So, will capitalism solve all problems in a timely fashion, in a manner that a lot of people would like to see? Well, it's not necessarily clear that will be the case. However, if you take two equally racist groups of people and you apply the competitive market process to one of them, and you apply a monopoly on the use of force distributed to the people who have had power historically, my guess is that the society that gets the market process is going to exhibit far less racism, far less sexism, and far more prosperity than the society in which, for all intents and purposes, the KKK gets the guns. Okay? You got a question? Mm-hmm. Okay. Mm-hmm. Okay. Okay. So I'll rephrase the question because, again, this is being recorded. Okay, so if you're a lumberjack and you're okay, and you sleep at night and you work all day, okay, but you're being discriminated against because of, perhaps some foibles that you have, or because of your race or gender or something like that, then the world is a fundamentally worse place as a result of the fact that we don't enjoy your output. Okay? That's absolutely true. It's absolutely positively 100% true. And this is what I think is one of the social costs of racism, discrimination, etc. I trust the market process to punish the person who's discriminating who's discriminating against you, far more than I trust the political process. Okay, because it's as much as I would like to force other people, force everybody to have the preferences that I want them to have. I would really be opening up a Pandora's box by doing that. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Not to put profits in.
Right.
The one time when they do not care about profits
anymore. Okay, that's an excellent point. I saw 2 hands. Then I'm gonna get back to lecture. Yeah. Right. 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 Okay, so we have a medical analogy, which is the difference between treatment with medication and treatment via amputation. And then another point that's brought up that I think really deserves some serious reflection, which is in the case of discrimination, it's generally assumed or generally thought that this is the one situation in which people aren't putting profits before people. Now, again, like I say, I do a lot of research on Walmart. And one of the reasons for that is because Walmart is sort of the universal stand-in for all things that are bad about capitalism. All right? One criticism of Walmart. So there are a couple of criticisms of Walmart. Walmart is so obsessed with profit that they will stop at nothing to improve their bottom line. Walmart is so blinded by their drive for profit that they don't care what they do to people. Walmart also is so blinded by their old boy Southern mentality that they are willing to discriminate against women. They're willing to leave money on the table to discriminate against women in promotion, to discriminate against women in wages, and so on and so forth. And in the Dukes versus Walmart case that's currently being litigated, 1.6 million people, I believe, have signed on to a class action lawsuit against Walmart because they discriminate. So Walmart is blinded by their obsession with profit, and Walmart is also blinded by their obsession with discriminating against women. Those two claims cannot be true at the same time. Either Walmart is an obsessive profit maximizer, or Walmart is an obsessive discriminator against women. The two cannot be true at the same time. Okay? Yes? Mm-hmm. Okay. Okay. Those two cannot be true at the same time unless there's one very, very specific, particular exception, which is that Walmart's consumers get utility from buying from a company that discriminates against women. And Walmart actually went through this in the 1980s with their Buy American campaign. Stephen Landsberg has criticized that because that's basically a form of discrimination. Okay. I would argue that yes, there is this one exception. The reason why I say that the two can't be true at the same time is that exception is so unlikely that I've never seen Walmart advertise, "Hey, rednecks, why don't you come and shop at Walmart because we're keeping women in their place," or something like that. Okay, one more point. Let's go front back. Mm-hmm. Okay. Another question or comment? Mm-hmm. Right. Sure. Yeah. Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Right. Yes. Okay, so a couple of points. One, why are women paid less than men? Differences in marginal productivity. Okay. Rhetorically, very carefully. Okay. I presented a paper several months ago on discrimination in mid-19th century American manufacturing, in which the takeaway point was the evidence suggests that, except for in this one case, everybody was paid their marginal product. I presented this paper at the Women's and Gender Studies conference at our institution. Okay, which I think, and again, since this is being recorded, I'll give props to the intellectual environment at my institution, because we had a fantastic discussion, absolutely fantastic discussion. I'm going to digress for just a second about intellectual gains from trade. Okay, and this will transition into my next point. I really admire an economist, an economic historian named Deirdre McCluskey, and McCluskey. I learned when McCluskey visited campus that I had been pronouncing her name incorrectly my entire professional career. It is not McCloskey, it is McCluskey, apparently. McCluskey argues that, as Professor Holzman pointed out the other day, that differences in productivity maximize, the larger the differences in productivity, the greater the range for gains from trade. Okay? So, even though, say, someone's economics, so, people at a women's and gender studies conference, their economics generally is going to be relatively shaky. They're going to have a different perspective on historical issues and things like that, from which we can profit. So, in terms of the intellectual adventure that you're all embarking on, seek out conversations with people who don't think the way that you do. So it can be, at times it may be frustrating, but also a lot of fun. I think very profitable in the long run. Okay. Now, the question, so getting back to this question, I do need to move on, but getting back to this question about Walmart and discrimination. Yes, it is true that in some cases you can have an equilibrium in which people are willing to pay a premium to shop at employers that discriminate. Particularly for a large firm like firms like Walmart, that's going to be increasingly unlikely, I think, and the failure of the Walmart Buy American campaign suggests that. So when Walmart said, "Hey, we're going to," they flat said, "We're going to discriminate against people who don't share our nationality," that worked for a little bit, but in long run equilibrium, or over the long run, it tended to fail. They were punished, as it were, by the market process for endorsing specifically discriminatory preferences. Okay. Now back to McCluskey. Another objection to capitalism. Capitalism deadens the soul. Okay? All right? What does it profit a man to gain the whole world and yet lose his soul? Okay? Or, in the words of William Wordsworth, in getting and spending we lay waste our powers. Okay, so yeah, sure, capitalism delivers the goods. Capitalism delivers you a Facebook page, and a MacBook, and Chick-fil-A chicken biscuits, and coffee, and water, and wireless internet, and Google, and clothing, and a hat with a shamrock on it, and air conditioning, and glasses, and polo shirts, and styrofoam cups, and Sprite, and books, and paper, and go on and on and on and on and on. But at what price? Okay. Incidentally, this is one of the few, and I think admirable cases in which the critics of capitalism engage in marginal analysis. Okay, it's one of the few situations in which they really truly ask at what price. McCluskey argues in a series of books, the first published in 2006. It's a 6-volume apology for capitalism, an apology in the theological sense. So it's a defense of capitalism for people who believe that capitalism needs to be defended. Everyone should read the first 60 pages of her book, The Bourgeois Virtues. Those first 60 pages are available at a price of $0 on Google Books. Okay? She argues that not only does capitalism deliver the goods, capitalism actually makes us better people. Consider that for just a second. Capitalism makes us better people. Certainly. Deirdre McCluskey. One of the great economic historians, and in my view, one of the great minds of the late 20th century, McCluskey did a lot of excellent empirical research in the 70s and 80s, and now describes herself as an Austrian economist in neoclassical drag. So as she's matured as a scholar, she's read more Mises and more Hayek, and is much more sympathetic to the good guys, as it were, than a lot of other people. All right. So McCluskey argues that capitalism makes us better people. A couple of channels. Income. More stuff. Okay? How many of you guys like Thai food? Anyone? All right. A lot of hands for people who like Thai food. How many of you guys like sushi? Okay? A lot of hands go up. Okay? We were in Great Barrington, Massachusetts for a few weeks, and my dad and my sister came to visit while we were there, and we went to a sushi restaurant for lunch. And my dad's not really a big sushi eater. Okay? My mother, who grew up in North Alabama, probably didn't eat Thai food until after I was in graduate school, or something like that. And I think when they visited me in St. Louis, we went to a Thai restaurant, or something to that effect. So, capitalism has broadened your choice set, okay, such that you're interacting with other cultures always and everywhere. Okay? I was walking around in Auburn when I got here several days ago and saw, like a Japanese martini bar and sushi restaurant. And I was like, this shows us that capitalism has worked. Okay? Any world, in spite of our current economic woes, the fact that there's a martini and sushi bar in Auburn, Alabama, tells me that the world in which we live has improved and improved dramatically. Okay? I didn't eat, I think I ate sushi for the first time about halfway through college. There was a Chinese restaurant that opened in Tuscaloosa, Alabama, where I went to school. And I went and said, "Oh, sushi! It's on the little buffet. I'll give it a shot." And it had this green sauce next to it. Okay? And I was like, "Oh, green! Avocados are green. So it's probably like some sort of cool sauce that you're supposed to slather all over the sushi." Okay? And so I go and I sit down, and I pick up the little sushi piece with my chopsticks, and I stick it in my mouth, and I start chewing. After the waiters and waitresses have stopped laughing, because my head is on fire. I mean, that was a near-death experience. I was really, wow. Okay, and I looked down and I looked down at my empty water glass because I just drained it a second ago. Okay, and again, the waiter or the wait staff, they laugh, and then they come and they pour me some water, and I'm sweating and tearing up and having the experience, a biblical experience of Job, as it were, in a sense. Okay, so that was my first experience with sushi. Okay, all of you guys, you like sushi, you like Thai food, you like all sorts of things that the market has brought us. And my guess is that my 1-year-old son eventually, for me, eating sushi was a novelty. In college, he's going to grow up with it. Okay. Having friends from all over the world, from all different cultures, is something of a novelty of modern life. And again, I expect my son to grow up. No, Dad, what's the big deal? I'm sending Facebook messages to my friends in Hong Kong or something to that effect. I have a hypothesis that the laptop computer and the iPod are going to be to our kids what pocket calculators are to us. And my dad told me about the first calculator he ever bought. Paid like $200 for it. Okay, so someday, my parent Jacob's going to look at a picture of me with my iPod and say, "I cannot believe you paid $250 for that." Okay, all right. So capitalism delivers the goods in that sense. It makes us better people in that it expands our consumption possibilities. It also perhaps makes us more artistic, more intellectually active, and more reflective. Okay. I noticed something that's very, very odd that's happening right now historically, which is that all of you guys are taking notes on what I'm saying. Paper is practically free. Pens are practically free. The ability to write, every word you can produce at a marginal cost of almost zero. Every word you can consume at a marginal cost of almost zero. The world has made us rich enough, capitalism has made us wealthy enough, that we can sit and have this discussion in a room at which the climate is controlled at 74 degrees in Auburn, Alabama at the end of July. So the very fact of this exercise in which we're engaged suggests that McCluskey is correct. about the ennobling and embiggening effects of capitalism in the market process. It's increased our life expectancies dramatically. Life expectancy at the height of the Roman Empire was 24. Life expectancy today is pushing 80. It has reduced infant mortality dramatically. Almost as importantly, it has reduced the probability of maternal mortality during childbirth. Okay? Think about that for just a second. Okay? Again, as I've said before, and as I'm sure you're tired of hearing, my son's birthday is on Friday. We could anticipate this, as he was approaching and all of this other stuff. We could anticipate this with joy because we knew that it was exceedingly unlikely, by a factor of like 100, the probability had fallen over the last century that Shannon would die of complications during childbirth. He's approaching his first birthday, which again we can approach with joy because this is something that is relatively unlikely historically. Okay? We can know with near certainty that he is in fact going to make it to his first birthday. We knew that coming in. So all of the sort of tragedies associated with the formation and growth of families over all of human history, capitalism has not totally eliminated, but has reduced considerably. Okay? What about values? So my wife and I go to a Southern Baptist church. Okay, we grew up. My grandfather was a Baptist minister, and one of the sort of common cultural criticisms of capitalism is that, it erodes our values. It provides us with all sorts of terrible stuff, terrible immoral stuff, like porn and violent video games and all of this other stuff, because capitalism preys on our basest and most animalistic instincts. Okay? Perhaps. And yes, capitalism does produce a lot of stuff that people might find morally offensive. But it's not clear that restricting that process is going to actually improve things. Let's consider porn. People criticize it and say, well, this contributes to violence. Contributes to violence against women and destroys families. Because if you look at people who tend to commit sex crimes, if you look at men who initiate divorce, they tend to be users of pornography, and therefore people infer that porn causes crime, or porn causes all sorts of really bad stuff. There's a serious statistical problem with that. Okay, which is there could be some third alternative, some common factor that's causing people to both use pornography and to commit sex crimes and initiate divorces. So, greater access to porn might in fact reduce the rate of sex crimes, might in fact reduce the divorce rate because it's a substitute for, rather than an input into, violence against women. There are a couple of excellent empirical studies that have been done in the last couple of years, one by Vinay Vongsarat and another by Todd Kendall, in which they argue one uses access to P.O. boxes to predict hustler subscriptions, the other uses internet diffusion to predict access to internet pornography. They show that all of this capitalist pandering to our basest instincts provides people with substitutes for violence against women. So there's less rape and less divorce, according to the data at least, as a result of sort of this increasing diffusion of quote unquote really bad stuff. Okay? So even when capitalism does quote unquote deaden our souls, cost, there's some type of benefit. Yes. So Hugh Hefner is helping save marriages across the country. I'm not sure if I would go that far. Okay. Maybe so. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right. Mm-hmm.
And say capitalism structure is a mission. To also say that the market system
Right.
fix that. America can't fix it. All Americans
Right.
show you the problem.
Okay.
I mean, like, our founders declared this
Right.
Britain. I mean, they didn't appeal,
Right.
they try to appeal.
Mm-hmm.
It takes action to fix
Right.
it.
Yes. Sure. Go for it. Well, here, hold on. Let me give you the mic. Okay. Patrick Emanuel from Palm Beach Atlantic University.
It says a democracy cannot exist as a permanent form of government. It can only exist until the voters discover they can vote themselves largesse from the public treasury, with the result that a democracy always fails under loose fiscal policy and is generally followed by a dictatorship. The average age of the world's great civilizations has been 200 years. These nations have progressed through this sequence, from bondage to spiritual faith to great courage, great courage to liberty, liberty to abundance, abundance to selfishness, selfishness to complacency, complacency to apathy, apathy to dependency, and back again into bondage.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Right. Okay. Okay. All right. So that's a good point. If I can condense that a little bit. So capitalism provides us with bread and circuses, such that we're busy. We're watching MTV, looking to see who's going to get punked next, or we're looking at porn when we should be studying the foundations of a free society. I have no necessary quarrel with that. I'm not really sure what if anything we could do to fix it. Okay. Now, so freedom in the free society will provide us with the impetus to action, okay, such that we can try to change people's preferences via peaceful persuasion rather than force. Okay. So one point, and this is something that's come up in Memphis recently, when our county commission passed an anti-discrimination ordinance, in which they said that we in Shelby County, or we as the Shelby County government, are going to make it illegal for government offices, I think, to discriminate on the basis of sexual preferences, or on the basis of sexual preference. Okay, which, as much as I might agree with that goal, one of the unintended consequences of that has been kind of an intellectual blowback. Okay, whereby people who are very, very sharply opposed to these people who have discriminatory preferences, are viewing this as some sort of special treatment. So I think that's ultimately going to end up doing more harm than good as we move toward the very long run. All right, if you could hold your questions for just a couple of seconds, I want to make 2 more points before we 3 more points before we open it up to discussion. Okay, capitalism destroys the environment. So this is another objection. Okay, the idea, capitalism destroys the environment. Capitalism is the process by which we extract material resources from Mother Earth and lay waste to the entire endeavor, or lay waste to the entire planet. Okay, so I showed you, if you were in the environmental and resource economics lecture, I showed you a picture of Zimbabwe, or a satellite image from Zimbabwe, where you had on the left side of the image, your left, communal farmland. On the right side of the image, privately owned farmland. Okay. The privately owned farmland was lush. The communally owned farmland was wasted. The Center for Global Development has this picture on their website. I'll add a link to it, to the Mises blog after the talk, and I'll also add some links to like McCluskey stuff and things like that. Okay? And in the early part of this decade, the Zimbabwean government enacted a program of land reforms whereby they redistributed privately owned farmland to people who are politically connected. And so you can do a before and after picture that shows the causal effect of land redistribution in Zimbabwe. So you had wasted communal land, lush private land. Then when you turned this private land into unclear property rights, redistributed quasi-communal land, this lush land becomes wasteland. I'll add a link to that picture on the Mises blog. So as we've discussed, private ownership of the means of production gives us the incentives we need to engage in rational economic calculation and therefore meaningful stewardship of our environmental resources. Hold on. Okay. Hold that thought. Okay, we'll talk about that in a little bit, okay? Penultimate point. Penultimate objection to capitalism. Some things are just too important to be left to the market. Healthcare is just too important to be left to the market. Well, my short answer to this is, given what we know about the difference between what's possible in a market economy versus what's possible in either a centrally planned government economy or a heavily interventionist economy, given that we know capitalism delivers the goods, if you're talking about something like healthcare, I would say healthcare is too important not to be left to the market. Okay? If you've ever lost family members, or if you've ever been really, really sick, then the fact that healthcare technology has not progressed to the point where it would be in an unhampered market becomes immediately salient. It becomes very relevant to the condition that you're in. One of a friend of mine suggested that as part of this talk, I mentioned that a lot of things that are derided as capitalism are not in fact capitalism. So one of the great myths of modern popular discourse is the idea that that the United States has an unregulated, unfettered, laissez-faire free market in healthcare. Absolutely, positively, 100% false. The government spends more than half the money. Even abstracting from that, third-party payer healthcare suggests that what we call health insurance it's not insurance in any meaningful sense. It's prepaid healthcare with very low marginal cost for treatment. I don't really have time to discuss the full details of the healthcare program, but this beast that we have in the United States that people call erroneously free market healthcare, but it's actually uber interventionist healthcare, arose in large part as a result of wage and price controls during, I believe, World War II. So the government says, hey, okay, we're going to freeze wages. Then everything's going to be great. Except for the fact that if you freeze wages below what would obtain on the unregulated market, this provides people with incentives to try to compensate laborers on other margins. So they said, okay, we can only pay you, say, $5,000 a year, but we'll give you $1,000 worth of health coverage in addition to that. And the courts ruled that health benefits were not wages. Now, we live in a world in which an increasing share of our total compensation comes not in the form of cash payment, not in the form of wages and salary, but in the form of fringe benefits like health care, contributions to 401ks, and things like that. Okay? So if anything, for stuff that's really, really, really important, like health care, it's too important not to be left to the market. The fact that it's been so heavily regulated over these last many years means that technological progress hasn't proceeded as rapidly as it otherwise would, and it's cost us dearly, not only in economic terms but also in human terms. What prevents free market healthcare from appearing? Regulatory infrastructure is the big thing. Okay, so things that prevent the emergence of a free market in healthcare, licensing restrictions are a very big thing. Okay, so you can be, and this actually happened during and after World War II when some of the great minds of Europe were chased out of Europe by the Nazis. They show up in the United States, and you have these brilliant physicians. Like I said, some of the great minds of the world show up in the United States, and they have to take licensing exams in English, okay, a language they don't speak. So they're prevented. So they're prevented in some cases from practicing the profession at which they're best. Consider one last objection to capitalism before we open it up for further discussion. Capitalism is just icky. Ew. Capitalism is just gross. It's not aesthetic. Bless you. It's not aesthetically beautiful. So instead of considering, and then this gets to the capitalism deadens the soul thing. So instead of spending your time reading and reflecting upon great books, you're shopping for Darth Vader's sippy cups at Walmart. You're buying Xbox games. You're listening to garbage music. Okay? What is sort of today's sort of high culture music, jazz and stuff like that. This was the sort of garbage music of the lower classes of 80 years ago. Okay, so give it another 100 years, and Tupac will be the music of the intelligentsia. All right. If I expected to live that long, I'd be willing to bet on it. All right. So this gets to some of our Walmart research. They say, well, it delivers the goods, but it's this disgusting process whereby you're just using people. back and forth. You're buying all this stuff that doesn't contribute to a noble life. You're buying cheap crap. Okay? And spending more time with the Mario Brothers on your couch playing Xbox than with your family and things like that. And make a long story short, in a series of papers, I and a couple of co-authors have shown that you shouldn't really believe the hype. Most of the stuff about the social cost of Walmart isn't really, there's not really a whole lot of veracity there. And then also, if you object on aesthetic grounds to capitalism and the market economy, I'm not really sure about the degree to which we can have a discussion. If you understand how economic systems actually work, you know that capitalism delivers the goods and provides all of this wonderful stuff and has us in this air-conditioned room writing on almost free paper about how much we either love capitalism or hate it. That's just a little bit weird. Capitalism, capitalist companies, the free market has never produced a death camp. The free market is not censoring websites in China. The free market is not the reason why, if you Google Tiananmen Square on the Chinese Google website, nothing comes up. That's not the free market. The free market didn't kill 250 million people in the 20th century. So if we're talking about which system is elegant and beautiful, I would like to think that the one that produced all the death camps and the censorship and things like that would be the one that unambiguously loses. So that is my story. We've got 5 to 10 minutes. More like 7 minutes. Let's entertain questions and answers. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay? Yeah. Yeah. Right. Yeah. Right. Yes. Yes. Yeah. The use. So in the South during after Reconstruction in the Jim Crow South, primarily this was the use of the state to indulge racist preferences. So let's consider one example. Okay, which is railroads. I apologize if I don't get to the rest of the questions, but this is relevant and salient. Okay, so you got a railroad. Okay, and they're hauling railroad cars. And they're hauling railroad cars through the South, and they have integrated railroad cars. Okay? Some people don't like that. They say, well, I'm sorry, I don't want to ride on a train with people who don't look like me. Okay? People who don't have the same skin color. Hey, railroad, why don't you... A little Taggart Transcontinental here. Okay. Railroad, why don't you have one railroad car for white people and another railroad car for black people? That would make us so happy because then we wouldn't have to sit with people that we don't like. How will the railroad respond? Yeah, it's too expensive, right? Because hauling that extra car is costly. Okay? Pulling one car that's full is cheaper than pulling two cars that are half empty. Okay? And this is more or less what we saw as a result of the market process. So everybody was happy, right? No. Because what the racists said is, well, okay, we can't get the railroad companies aren't going to do this of their own volition, but if we go to the state capital, there's a great manufactory of laws. To borrow a phrase from Friedrich Bastiat, there's a great manufactory of laws, and we will say, why don't you pass a law saying that you have to have the white people car and you have to have the black people car. This is what ultimately happened. It's a product of statism, not a product of capitalism. Among the sort of various crimes against humanity that were committed by the Jim Crow regime in the South were laws against immigrant agents, laws against enticement. Okay, so the immigrant agent law said, if you're a labor recruiter from the North, I believe there's a law in Montgomery, said if you're a labor recruiter from the North, you're not allowed to come into our town and recruit labor unless you post a bond of like $500. Okay? So the Jim Crow South, the legal institutions of the Jim Crow South were basically like a wholesale revolution by racists against the institutions of a well-functioning market economy. Anti-enticement statutes said, okay, I have people who work for me, you're not allowed to offer them higher wages. So basically, what it does, if you think in terms of supply and demand diagrams, is it's a law saying, here's the real demand curve. You have to behave as if this is the demand curve, so wages will be lower. Then there were vagrancy statutes that were basically compulsory labor force participation that said, okay, you have to have a job. Okay? You have to work for somebody. The fact that you're between jobs suggests perhaps that you're doing something illegal. Okay? So I will, and again, since I study this, I will be the absolute last person to say that American history and world history is not shot through with absolutely appalling activity. Okay? A number of abolitionists were lynched during the years leading up to the Civil War, just for saying, "Hey, maybe slavery is not a good idea." Okay, that's not the kind of intellectual environment in which I wish to, I would wish to operate. Okay, but most of those problems, they're not problems of the unregulated, unhampered free market, but are problems of the use of force via the state to accomplish goals that would otherwise receive a capitalist comeuppance. Okay. All right. Who is number two? I think we have a minute. Yeah. Right. Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, totally. Sure. Okay. Yeah. So reflect for just a minute. Maybe something to think about during lunch is: are we more alienated and demoralized with Facebook.com? And would we be more ennobled if we were using Facebook.gov? Okay. All right. On that, it's 11:15. I'm sorry I didn't get to everybody's questions, but I'll be around during lunch. I'm enjoying the conversation, and let me know if there's anything you want to know.